We speak. Our words. We listen.
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 Hello again, and thank you to all the people in all the different countries and all the different professions and all the different individuals who are listening to our words at Autistic Radio. Today we're making a group podcast after the event, the UK Society for Behaviour Analysts Annual Conference 2025, which we attended. It's obviously quite a controversial subject, ABA, all the way around the world and also here in the UK. The majority of organisations who work to represent autistic people take a very strong stance. The stance is ban ABA, ban PBS, ban everything that fails to recognise the implementation of the neurodiversity paradigm, as we now call it. And that is entirely understandable given the history of how autistic people have been dealt with over the years and continue to be dealt with in different countries. So why are we willing, as Autistic Radio and Autistic Association, the autistic charity completely run by autistic people here in the UK, why are we willing to engage? I think our group recognises that protest can create change, but there's always the room beyond protest for people to discuss, to try to modify or engage, to try and explain the autistic sensibility, to try and explain how it really feels to be us. And if we give the people who now are the bogeymen, the people who are used as the example of the worst way of dealing with autistic people historically, if we engage with them, then perhaps that's where we can make the most difference. That's how we can change small things that might reach out to the largest number of people. So while I'm sure that protest will continue and increase, I also hope that engagement with those communities and negotiation with those communities will bear fruit for autistic people. We have a number of people here. Is there anything in what I've said that doesn't fit with how you guys feel about this?
No, I totally agree. What you've put forward is the understanding of why there is protest and apprehension and suspicion over the ABA and kind of similar behavioural stuff because of the history. There's a massive protest and you know why there's a pushback on. I totally get it myself. But I also understand that the approach that we're taking is to have that conversation, be involved with people that are more, just to get an understanding and to actually bring our views within rather than just be outside. You can protest about a lot of things without knowing the full facts. You just go by the information that you're given. But if you can get more information and more facts, you may learn new things and things that are more positive than you realise. That's something worthwhile doing.
Yeah, it's like we have to see if there are possibilities rather than just outright refusal to engage. Because non-engagement itself is a form of engagement. It's just, apart rather than together.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that we're an important voice and that to be inside this, they need almost like a test group of people in there who can speak and react and respond in a proper way without protest, more with, sort of the knowledge that you're trying to work with instead of against.
I think these organisations do think sometimes that they already do have a representative voice within them, and they feel that they already have opened their doors for conversations. But it doesn't look like that to me for a couple of reasons. The first thing is, what I've witnessed over the years is autistic people validly being invited to tell their stories, tell their history. It looks a little bit like a kind of pornography that an autistic person is invited to entertain with their struggle. And the validity in that is probably to remind people of the reason they got into their profession, the reason that they want to be part of the good guys, the people who support a disabled group. So having somebody who is clearly disabled telling their difficult story has a validity there. But it does look very often as though that is the only way that autistic people get a voice when there are large groups of professionals to speak. I myself have given heartfelt sentences and talked personally before to professionals, and you get a feedback that says, wow, that was powerful, wow, that was emotional. But surely there's room for well-organised autistic people to engage at a more professional eye-to-eye level than being paraded as almost victims. I am unwilling to take a victim status, and I know you guys are. You've all had different experiences and careers, and it's inappropriate for us to take that role. We need a role where we are respected for our competency rather than being an example of our disability or difficulty. Have I said anything that disturbs people with that? Are you comfortable?
No, that's very positive, Jules.
No, it's very positive. I get what you're saying. I've been involved in many things, been invited to these mental health kind of meetings, etc., and give your story. You give this story and you actually get through quite a journey by giving this story. And then it's like, clap. And then it's all, well done, that's great. You've been very brave in doing that. And then there doesn't seem to be anything more than that. There doesn't even seem to be any respect. It's just like a pat on the head. And I think a lot of people can feel that way if they don't feel they've been taken seriously. You're given that personal perspective and not to feel you've been taken seriously. It can be quite damaging.
Yeah, it's kind of having one person come up and tell their story and talk about their journey, like catching a spider under a glass and put it on display for everybody to look at for a little while before you release it back into the wild. It doesn't seem like there's very much to it, apart from just being able to tick that box that we had somebody with an authentic experience coming in. Authentic experience is something they should be valuing and maybe using a bit more, rather than just sort of bringing somebody up to speak and then say, well done, and sending them on their way. There should be a further conversation from there.
I want to also come back to say that when I was at this conference, I hung out. I made myself very visible, very obvious. People came to speak to me. a number of people came to speak to me about their own neurodivergence or about the neurodivergence of a family member. The percentage of people who work in ABA slightly surprised me. So it could be possible for these organisations to say, well, look, we're employing neurodiverse people. This organisation, the UK SBA, has at least one person who is openly autistic on their board, not just as a student member, as they were in the past, but now as a full member. And they have a autism special interest group, they call it, which is an unfortunate title, but it's a kind of task force for engagement with the autistic community that's starting to get going. They could easily say, well, look, we're doing it ourselves. But I think that's wrong, because there's a real big difference between somebody who is entirely engaged within the profession and somebody who is a complete outsider of the profession and a professional in their own right, maybe, or somebody who works within a charity like our charity, perhaps. The outside influence is entirely different from people who are already within the community.
Is that the ABA-PBS community you're referring to?
Within ABA and PBS, there are lots of autistic people that I'm coming across. It's almost as though their autism attracted them to the study of how human beings worked. It's a little bit like when I meet psychiatrists and psychologists. The reason they often got into psychiatry or psychology was a family member or their own experience of the need to understand themselves. And I think within ABA and PBS, there are a number of autistic people who have specifically taken that profession as a journey, as a way of looking at themselves and then realizing their autism as they've gone along. So inside the professions, there are an autistic people. However, what I'm trying to say is that even those people still need to have a different experience that comes from being outside, because the vast majority of autistic people do not have that training experience or background, and some would say indoctrination even into a way of thinking, though I think that's a bit harsh. That would be a protester view, I think.
Isn't it a heightened state of advocacy that they are performing?
It could be, but they could also feel, for lots of reasons, restricted in speaking about their own autism within their professions.
Eventually, a minority group gets a political representative. There's often a suspicion amongst that group about this representative because they're in there, so they're compromised.
Somebody else has written sellout in the text there as a perception that could happen.
So-called sellout, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think the people within the professions are unlikely to be able to speak out in the way that people outside the profession can speak out. That's a general feeling. It might not feel correct for them. And as far as the idea of people from the outside autism community, the protest or even just the vaguely interested part, I am sure that there would be a suspicion that people inside, the insiders, would not be representing the majority of us who are outside the profession in the way that they might wish there would be a suspicion that it's not really a voice of the general autistic population, because that might be different.
Well, I understand the stuff that Jules has raised and discussed because of the way autism has been looked at in the past and still in many people's eyes today, is that autism is a deficiency, it's a disability, it's something wrong, and it's something that should be eradicated, should be removed, should be cured. So to be involved in the discussions with the organisations that are kind of linked to that sort of historic kind of behaviour is always going to be a tough one. You're better being within, having these discussions within, rather than protesting from the outside, so you can get as many views as possible, as much as information as possible. That's why I'm really keen on what Jules is doing.
Yeah, it's wise to know your enemy, because they might turn out to not be your enemy, or you can negotiate some kind of peace pact. But I'm curious about yourself, Harry, because you've been involved in activism and sort of minor politics, community politics and stuff, and that kind of engagement with these institutions and groups who may or may not be, representing you. But you have to have the conversations, because we all live in the same world. An awful lot of autistic people, I think, go on this journey of wanting to be an advocate and explore possibilities for themselves and others, and to help and assist. There are ways of doing that, and sometimes it is engaging with institutions.
Yeah, Raymond. What I did at the conference, I prepared around 7 different unique presentations in the weeks going up to the conference. They all had slightly different flavours, but generally they had similar themes. It's a very difficult situation for all of us. For those people who want to advocate and work towards that, and also those people receiving that advocacy. Instead of using those presentations that I prepared, I worked through them in my head, and I had them in my head. And when it came to standing up in front of the group of people who were there, which was the president of the association and several of the board members and a few other particularly interested parties, it was a smallish group of 40 or so people, maybe more. I decided to just go entirely off script and just speak to them. And not only that, I encouraged them to come back to me and create the presentation themselves by asking questions or putting forward possibilities. And the one I remember most was one of the board members challenged me and said, why is it that I'm taking a different position, or we as a group are taking a different position to the general protest that happens out there? And I said that I thought actually that was a normal part of the autistic experience, that autistic people do not like to be told what to think. And as we find our autism and identify ourselves as autistic in our adult lives, one of the things we do is to search out other autistic people, and they tend to try to recruit us immediately into the orthodoxy of ban ABA, etc. But then I said immediately that, however, I have right from the start of the podcast series that we made with them, had in there, in the notes, the phrase that I want to change ABA. I just don't know what it is that I want to change yet. So I was trying to get across the position that I am entirely sure that there are parts of what the autistic community are advocating as against traditional ABA as it has been practiced throughout the world that need to be addressed. I'm not going there just to say how can I platform them? I want to actually be a useful member to my own community as well, which is to change some of the things that are still happening, things that this group of people were quite clearly trying to distance themselves from, and they've made some big steps in that, moving their own organisation to be entirely UK based and not so influenced from the whole world view. But I also put forward the point that because of the increase in population around the world and because of my experience travelling in India and Indonesia, what I saw as ABA in the old school type of ABA, the conversion therapy type of ABA that is constantly being criticised by them and the autistic group, being promoted to the middle classes, so that the middle classes were not particularly interested in the neurodiversity paradigm that we have the interest in over here. The emerging economy middle class wants to have their kids sorted out so that they succeed in a competitive market and normalized as much as possible. And so the parents themselves are quite interested in the idea of retraining their children to be less flappy. And so it's not as though I'm going there to not give them uncomfortable truths. In fact, afterwards, people come up to me and said that some of the things I said were rather challenging, but they felt that those challenges need to be heard in a wider manner throughout the profession. Thank you for the texter there. The texter puts that we have never said we are pro-ABA or even PBS either. There's a third mind possible here. Well, without doubt. I don't think any of us are comfortable with the examples of ABA from the past, but I also know that some of the people who were at that conference and who take part in podcasts are absolutely not comfortable with what has happened in the past. They are going through a period of reflection, and they are looking for reconciliation. The other thing that I was there for was to describe how the Autistic Radio model was a unique way of creating a forum where we felt that we had an equal eye-to-eye opportunity to speak to the professionals, whereas all the other forums that they create fail to do that. I used the word fail to say that things needed to change fairly often in my presentation.
The thing that I've learned when being suspicious or being actually even against something, a practice of something, is sometimes it's better not to all just say no. It's better to find out the full facts of something that you disagree with in terms of the information that you have, to have the conversation, to get as much information as possible, which may even change your view or kind of certainly soften your view on a particular thing, like ABA, which is, I find, quite difficult to say, actually, just saying that. But it's like, to be fair, to be as fair as possible. But then again, it has to come both ways, the fairness. But I do agree with what's been said so far. It's to have that conversation, it's to be involved and not just saying no and just protesting because you don't agree with something because of information you have. Because there's things that have been, information that's been provided, experience that's been provided that may be from an older model or a more worldwide model, like a US model, rather than the UK model, which is meant to be more progressive. So to be as involved and have the much conversation as possible is great. But what also needs to be is a respect coming from the other side to our contribution.
Before I went on stage, I spoke to one of the organisers who also has a an important role within their organisation. And I asked them, what single thing does this group of people want to hear from me? What is the thing I could say that would help them the most? And she said to me that they are afraid. They are nervous that you are going to go and stand out there and lambast them and attack them and make them feel uncomfortable. So I took that on board as though I hadn't already taken it on board, but it definitely concentrated my mind on that one thing. So I stood up in front of them and I put my hands in the air and I said, yes. The first word of this presentation is yes, and the last word of this presentation is yes. Yes, we can engage. Yes, we can listen as you explained. Yes, we can have a meaningful conversation and input. Yes, we can have a conversation that is entirely comfortable for you as a profession and us as an autistic group. And it set the tone for the whole thing. Yes, I was there also reflecting some of the things that people had asked me to reflect in the emails to news@autisticradio.com. I told them that the majority view that I had read from those emails was that they needed to understand the relationship between autistic people and masking, and that they really didn't understand the complexities of masking, and they didn't understand how they themselves could be encouraging the negative experiences of masking that can happen. I also told them from the emails that I had received that one of the most important things from the autistic community was to be recognized as having an ability to understand ourselves that we could then express, because the people who put those emails to me gave me stories where they felt as though they had put all their words together, but their words hadn't been received in the communication that they had intended. I emphasized the difference in communication between us, but I also tried to say to them that the communication that we have is not incorrect for us. I think the third point I tried to take from the emails was, fuck, it's gone out of my head. Shit, I had a really good sentence there. Was about empathy and how what the autistic people were seeing when they saw the demonstrations of how some of the programs that are based on behaviourism are applied, how when we view them, our empathy is with the child, and we see things that the child is doing or how the child is behaving and reacting from the empathy that we have of sameness that they misunderstand, and that we can see how the child is actually adapting and covering up and masking and cheating the system. So what they are being involved with as a therapy or as a support might not be as appropriate as the practitioner taking the program on believes it to be, that they might be ignoring what we can tell and see and witness through our empathy with other autistic people, particularly the children, and that information could really inform them if they were willing to engage with us. Okay, I'm going to read out 3 of the texts from the texters. They don't necessarily follow my train of thought, but here they are. I often draw a parallel with engaging with employment and the workforce, as though I believe the texter is saying that there is an antagonism, a power structure that's evident. After I talked about what was the most important thing to say, somebody puts here, the institutions are constantly afraid. It's their default. And another one is that empathy is not good enough for institutional experts, ? Well, that last one I think is antagonistic, I would say. Surely it's the reality under the double empathy problem concept that it's easier to empathize with people who have more similarity. So it's easier for us to empathize with the autistic person and see and understand what might be going on inside their heads than it is for a non-autistic person. And then conversely, the other way around, that we perhaps miss some of the machinations inside a non-autistic person's head.
And that non-autistic person is very often the institutional expert, usually following science in therapeutic practice, yeah?
Well, yeah, I think that probably is the case, that people in research and science, despite their best intentions, if they're not autistic, might not be able to quite grasp everything in the way that an autistic person would. And that's what they try to do. They try to communicate with us to try and get those insights, but often it comes on their own terms, which leads me to talk about how I describe the difference with Autistic Radio and the model that we're creating, which is entirely unique, because we create a forum which invites them to come and speak with us on an equal footing. Cameras off, just in text, nobody interrupting, people being given a long opportunity to express themselves. All the silence is ignored, so we don't have to feel as though we're put on the spot. We don't have to keep gabbling and talking as you would if you were at a conference or in a meeting. And then the editing process is there to make it so that people speak in a very succinct way, so that the listener can actually grasp what maybe the professional or the autistic person is trying to say. So it helps both parties. And I made them laugh when I described how I had to edit a great deal when it was a non-autistic person because of all of the expectation a non-autistic person has to fill the air, to fill the space, to use many, many words, whereas the edit comes out a lot clearer and more authentic to actually what they're trying to say in many cases.
More autistic even.
Yeah, but I did try to emphasize how many of in fact, I don't know anybody who hasn't said it yet, that the people who come as non-autistic professionals find the format that we create refreshing themselves. They find it enables them to get their ideas more clearly, that they are also released from doing all of the social stuff, that they end up in a much more comfortable situation than that they are when they are performing on Zoom to cameras and trying to make sure that they get their words in, that the whole way that we do it enables them to come across well as well.
Yeah, it's outside the box. Very often we are masking to connect to and engage with the neurotypical normative experience, but is the reverse happening? Is a neurotypical normative individual having to perform for the autistic or neurodivergent experience?
Well, you bring up a point, and it's possible that some of the contributors will feel like that. But so far, most have said they find it simpler and more refreshing. So I'm happy with it at the moment. We can take advice from them as we progress to make it easier for them.
Yeah, I think it opens up the space for that third mind, the shared mutual experience.
So to finalise things, after the conference, the president contacted me to say that our presentation was one of the highlights of the conference. And that was reiterated by a couple of other board members also. And they also contacted to say that they were putting us forward in ways to try and engage. There were also people who just wanted to speak quietly about a family member or themselves, and I was happy as an advocate to give them that personal time. One thing did come up immediately, and that was an invitation to present at the PBS main conference, Positive Behavioural Support. So one is the main conference for ABA, and the second one is the main conference for PBS in the UK. And unfortunately, we are expected to go there and subsidise the costs. We are expected to go there, even though they feel they've been quite generous with offering accommodation and access to the whole conference. If I went to that conference, I would have to take 2 days off from my profession, and I would be out of pocket. And I have to say, having just been out of pocket at one conference, I've actually said to them no, unless they cover my losses and make sure I'm not paying anything, or the charity isn't paying anything, I can't take part in that, which is a real shame. It's a shame for us because, you know, it's not only a national conference, but it's beamed out internationally. But I can't justify spending to support a multi-billion pound industry.
I totally agree with that. Your time, our time, your expertise, our expertise is worth more than what's being offered. And it's the approach where, even though it's a good opportunity, a great opportunity, the way the opportunity has been presented is not respectful for the work that would be needed and is needed for it to be fruitful to everyone involved.
This has been an Autistic Association production for Autistic Radio. If you have comments, if you are interested in furthering this discussion, contact news@autisticradio.com. Thank you so much for giving your attention to us today. There are so many other things that you could have done, and it's lovely to see the increasing numbers of people throughout the world taking part in the Autistic Radio project. Autistic Radio is about us, it's for us, and it's from us. Autistic Radio is about you, it's for you, and it can be from you. We have every single Sunday drop-in, 4:44 p.m. every Sunday. That's not live, that's us getting together, us talking, community. Every Sunday, Harry leads a 5:55 p.m, a discussion around the Facebook page that he creates. Involve yourself by suggesting what we should talk about next. Share it with Harry. And then, the bigger picture. Advocate. Use us. Speak to the world. Your project, your idea, your enthusiasm. We have a whole range of different programs that will fit what you want. As far as listening goes, there's some challenging stuff out there. Because amongst the identity, the entertainment, and the community, we also make serious programs with autism professionals, challenging their ideas and bringing what you say in other spaces to them. A lot of those are difficult listens, but it's a holistic gathering. It comes all together. Autistic Radio is very varied. We need a favour. To encourage us, we need you to share us. When you share us, you give autistic people power. When you share us, you make us impossible to ignore. When you repost on LinkedIn and Facebook and anywhere else, you're advocating for everybody in the autistic community. So pick the things that you're happy with and get them out there. So thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you from all of us.